everybody. In this video I'm going to show you how to knit in garter stitch. Garter stitch is probably the simplest, most beginner-friendly way to knit, so I recommend it for your first few projects, and it works great for flat pieces like scarves and dish towels. So you'll need some yarn and a pair of knitting needles, and you'll need to cast your project on before we begin. And garter stitch is worked in back and forth rows, which are all done using a basic knit stitch. So if you need a review of the basic knit stitch, go check out my video on that and then join us for more knitting. So I've got my backwards loop cast on stitches here, and I'm just going to knit my first row using the basic knit stitch. So now I've knit my first row, and I'm ready to begin the back and forth rows that create garter stitch fabric. So I'll take my needle with all my stitches on it and point it the opposite direction. So I'm looking at the back of my fabric, and notice we don't have V stitches on the back of knit stitches. We have these little horizontal dashes. So I've got those facing me. I'll just trap this little tail out of my way, and I'm going to knit my way across this row using a basic knit stitch exactly like I did for my first row. I'll go in from the front of the first stitch, wrap my working yarn, pull it through, and slip it off. So now I've done my first two rows, and you can begin to see the texture of this fabric taking shape. The great thing about garter stitch is that the fabric doesn't have a right and wrong side. Both sides look exactly the same, and how they look is alternating rows between knit stitches that look like little V's and the back of knit stitches that look like little dashes. So we'll do a few more rows so you can see that more clearly. Once again, to make my third row, I'm going to take my yarn, or my needle with all my yarn on it, point it the other direction, and go through knitting every stitch in the row with a basic knit stitch. So now we've completed several rows of garter stitch, and you can start to see the texture that it takes on. The knit stitches sort of lie at one level, and then the back side of the next row of knit stitches creates this sort of three-dimensional stripe made up of the little horizontal dashes. So we can actually count our rows based on that texture. We've got one row of knit stitches here, then the second row where we're seeing the back of knit stitches here, the third row that looks like knit stitches again, the fourth row that looks like dashes again, and way up by our needles we have the fifth row that looks like knit stitches again, and we're getting ready to do the sixth. So that's garter stitch fabric. It's great, as I may have mentioned, for like dish towels, hot pads, scarves, anything that's a flat rectangular piece. You also may come back to garter stitch with more complicated projects like sweaters or socks. It just depends on what you prefer in your knit fabric texture. So practice your garter stitch, and when you're ready, go check out stockinette stitch and cabling and all the other fun things we can do with knitting.